It is so great to be back doing this, even with these bloody masks. There was a smile under there. So. This is one of the great moments in the life of a college. One of my favorite moments in any year, other than last year when we didn't do it at all, where we celebrate the remarkable achievements of a member of our faculty who are honored with a chair. And I want to begin tonight by, as I will end, by congratulating Professor Eric Chown for being the first holder of the Sarah and James Bowdoin Chair in Digital and Computational Studies. Remarkable accomplishment, Eric. Thank you. Eric as Jen pointed out at the small dinner that we had, has been waiting patiently since 2019. Something intervened, and don't take it personally, Eric, that we made you wait so long for this moment. This is a chair that was endowed by an anonymous benefactor of the college, and as I said, Eric is the first holder of the chair. Eric arrived here in 1998, and he established himself quickly as one of the leading innovators in the interconnected network of disciplines that eventually became to be known as digital and computational studies. And he is one of the founders and leading lights of this department, this work here, and as it extends out more broadly beyond Bowdoin. He was first a member of the computer science department, later chair of the department, and his work then, as it does now, transcended the boundaries of traditional conceptions of computer science. His scholarship and his teaching have been broad and novel and interdisciplinary, and examining from many angles the ways that both humans and machines learn. In addition to teaching popular courses in artificial intelligence, cognitive architecture, which we talked a little bit about at dinner tonight, computer programming, Eric has produced important and influential work in the areas of computational models of human learning, emotion, cognitive robotics, and digital metaphors, among other topics, and has published his findings in journals such as Cognitive Science and Adaptive Behavior. And he has shared his work at numerous conferences over many years. His new book, Meaningful Technology, which he co-authored with his colleague and our colleague, Professor Fernando Nascimento, will be published next year. I believe that's right. That's what it says here, so it must be true. And perhaps, above all else, many of us know Eric because of his love of robots. He's well known not just on our campus for this, but nationally and internationally. He was the leader and advisor and founder, leading light, of Northern Bytes, our Robocup team. He did this for 12 years, in addition to all of the other things that he was doing here. Eric and his teams of students competed in the Standard Platform League with soccer-playing robots that they created and programmed. And there are many awards included winning the International Robocup competition in 2007 and the US Open in 2008, as well as coming in second in the Robocup competition in 2009. And they had top 3 finishes in other US Open competitions for a number of years. Clearly they rocked in the world of Robocup competition. Not all fun and games either. Eric received a 5-year National Science Foundation grant for a project called Computational Models of Space in Navigation and Other Domains, which enabled him to purchase robots that were necessary for the work that he was doing in the classroom. Eric received his undergraduate and master's degrees from Northwestern University. As a University of Chicago person, I'm not going to hold that against Eric. It's a little bit of a joke, just a little bit. And his PhD from the University of Michigan. He is an inspirational teacher and mentor, an influential scholar. He's an extraordinary force on our campus. And I am delighted that Eric is the first holder of the Sarah and James Bowdoin Chair in Digital and Computational Studies. Please welcome Dr. and Professor Eric Chown.
Wow, that person sounds great. So Clayton mentioned the book that I have coming out with Fernando Nascimento, and this talk is largely based on that book. And I want to start by acknowledging Fernando's contribution both to the book and to this talk. And the funny thing is that we didn't start out wanting to write a book. We were just two colleagues with some overlapping interests who met every week and talked about stuff. And one day we looked at each other and said, you know, the only thing that will hold all the ideas we've been talking about is a book. And the next thing you know, we'd written one. I never expected to. It's been one of the great joys of my academic experience, and I really want to thank Fernando for that experience. The second thing I want to say is that I am starting on a cautionary note. There might be some people in the audience who like to pick nits. And I want to warn you up front, I'm going to use the word metaphor a lot in this talk. And some of the nitpickers might take exception with some of the ways that I use it, might aggravate you. So if you notice I'm calling something a metaphor, and you think, no, that's an analogy or a simile or something, I'm using metaphor as what we call an umbrella term, right? Itself a metaphor. So be ready for that. Second warning, my next 4 or 5 slides are terrible. The things will get better after that. Just want you to know. So as President Rose said 2 years ago, he gave me the news about this amazing honor. Then as now, I'm overwhelmed. I'm grateful to each and every person who's here during a pandemic. Thank you very much for that. In fact, I would say that I was over the moon. I was on top of the world. I mean, I've really climbed the ladder of success. The world is truly my oyster. So I'm going to be talking about metaphors and how metaphors ask us to see something as being something else. Here we're seeing the world as if it's a pearl, which means the metaphor is actually wrong here, but that's okay. The other metaphors were built on ideas like success is up, happiness is up, feeling down or having failure is being down. People who study this stuff say about 20% of all discourse comes in the form of metaphors. And if you start paying attention to conversations, you start thinking about it, you realize it's everywhere. Metaphors are a fantastic way to convey a lot of information with just a few words. Now imagine I want to describe someone to you. One thing I could do is I could list their characteristics. I could say, well, she's brave, she's smart, she's independent, she's from a very prominent family. My family doesn't like her family so much. I really like her. Or one famous character used metaphor. So with just 4 words, Shakespeare was able to tell us a huge number of things, both about Juliet and also about Romeo. This is because metaphors build on things that we already know. We know about the sun. Our experience with the sun tells us a lot about how Romeo might feel about Juliet. Now, the thing is about this is it doesn't tell us exactly, because in literature as well as in conversation, we recognize that metaphors are abstractions. Romeo doesn't mean Juliet is literally the sun. That would be insane. To understand a metaphor, we start with what we know about the source. In this case, it's the sun. So everything I know about the sun comes from the album Science is Real by They Might Be Giants. And in particular, they told me that the sun is a miasma of incandescent plasma. And if Juliet is the sun, does that make her a miasma of incandescent plasma? I'm pretty sure that's not what Romeo meant. But he may well have meant that she was incandescent. So metaphors ask us to see something as being something else, but only by taking a select few features from that source. With some metaphors, this can be really hard. Shakespeare also told us that time is a beggar. And I'll leave it for you to think about why that's the case. Fernando and I spent like 3 weeks on this, and we eventually gave up and read the source and figured it out. It's also important to recognize that different people are going to pull different features from metaphors. The differences might become because of your personal experience, it might be because of the context, and it might be because of culture. That is a big one. Metaphors can be wonderfully and terribly ambiguous. As we'll see, with technology, the situation is very different. For one thing, with technology, the goal is to be crystal clear. Developers don't want their intended audience to ponder, what does he mean? Shakespeare might have liked it if you thought about time as a beggar or Juliet as the sun weeks afterwards. Mark Zuckerberg does not want you wondering what he means by friend on Facebook. Another important way that digital metaphors are different is that we make them concrete. The initial metaphor is still abstract, like with Shakespeare, but then we implement it, and that implementation has a lot of consequences, which I'll be talking about for the next 45 minutes or so. As I go through the talk, I'm going to mention a lot of ways in which digital metaphors, the kind I'm talking about, are accelerators. They accelerate learning even beyond the way that normal metaphors do. This, that they're concrete, they're material, is the first. And to talk about digital metaphors, I'm going to talk about myself and my history at Bowdoin. Clayton mentioned that I spent a little bit of time in robotics. I want you all to think about robots. What comes to mind? Visualize a robot. I think most people would visualize a robot that looks quite a bit like a person, maybe even this famous robot. Once, not so long ago, there were basically two ways to talk about robots. This is the pop culture way, right? In pop culture, generally it's bleak. There's a coming robot apocalypse. And notably, most stuff in this genre is written by white men, and it's easy to think about this in anti-immigration terms. Even sentient robots in pop culture are generally nothing more than slaves. Even positive portrayals of robots in pop culture are rarely realistic. Usually the capabilities are exaggerated, or they're not used in intelligent ways. Realistic portrayals just don't seem that interesting. Then there's this way. If you really want to understand robots, then you need to understand how they work. This is a slide from a robotics course. And I toyed with the idea of walking you through the equations on this slide, but I'm pretty sure that everyone would get up and leave after a couple of minutes. It turns out I know a lot about robots and how they work, and I would guess very few people in this room share that knowledge. It took me a lot of years, a lot of hard work to gather that knowledge, and it's not something I can just package up and hand to you in a matter of minutes. That difference between what I know and what everybody else knows makes talking about technical things like robots very challenging. This isn't true in general with technology. It presents a big challenge in communicating about it. So in this picture, the ground under each person represents their foundational knowledge, or what we sometimes call their meaning horizons. There's a gulf between what the layperson on the right knows and what the expert on the left knows. And if the expert is talking in expertise, it's going to sound like gibberish. Now at Bowdoin, we have entire courses designed around the idea of bridging this gap. But if you're in a conversation, or if you're a tech company, there isn't time. There isn't 15 weeks to devote to building foundational knowledge for someone, and so you have to do something else. Just to give you an idea of how this works in tech, I would imagine every person in this room, or nearly every person, has a cell phone and uses them frequently. It's basically what my talk's about. but I suspect very few people here could describe how the phone turns sound into electronic signals, or how cellular networks work to route your traffic to the right place, or any of a long string of things that have to happen when you make a phone call. Now, to use the technology, we don't have to understand all of that stuff. Sometimes that's a problem. The solution we normally employ to bridge this gap between knowledge is metaphor. With metaphor, we can say, well, I know you don't know about X, but it's like this other thing Y, and that's something you understand. We've seen this during the pandemic. There's a new technology available, the mRNA vaccine. Scientists need to communicate about it to the public so the public won't be so afraid. So they've turned to metaphors. Some of the metaphors include, they're like Snapchat messages that expire. They're like a recipe with instructions on what to make. They're like a system that only plays the catchiest part of a song so you'll recognize the real thing later. All of these metaphors capture things about the vaccines in a relatively easy to understand way, but I'll note that none of them actually tell us a thing about how those vaccines work, and all of them are lacking in some way in their description in terms of the features. This kind of communication is something the whole world is grappling with right now, trying to get people to understand how this new technology works. So around 1998, a bunch of roboticists got together and they were looking for a good metaphor. They wanted to communicate. They wanted to connect what they were doing with their robots to the public in a way that would raise interest, awareness, and of course, money. So they chose a metaphor from sports, chose the most popular sport in the world, and the resulting metaphor was robots are soccer players. And thus, Robocup was born, soccer's answer to the World Cup, or rather robotics' answer to the World Cup in soccer. Now, some people in here, a fair number, have seen Robocup or clips from Robocup. If you haven't, what I want you to do is imagine in your mind what it looks like. Just picture what robots playing soccer probably looks like. All right. Probably didn't look like this. This is what Robocup looked like in its very first year. Probably isn't what you thought of when you heard of robot soccer players, but it was the best they could do with the state of the art more than 20 years ago. This is a good time to remind you that metaphors are abstractions, not perfect copies, and this is especially true for some technologies. So I want you to take a look at this photo and notice some things. First, I mentioned that digital metaphors make abstract things concrete. So here we have actual robot soccer players. We say that we instantiate that metaphor. So it's one thing to be told that robots are soccer players. It's entirely different to see it, to see a picture of it, or to see the robots in action, which you'll see in a couple of minutes. On the one hand, it's pretty reductive in terms of your imagination. Some of you might have thought of really cool versions of what robot soccer players might look like. On the other hand, and what I'm interested in tonight, is it greatly increases our ability to learn about robots because they can grab, they can hold our attention, and we can experience that implementation over and over. So let's take a look at the field. It doesn't look too much like a regular soccer field. The goals are yellow on one side. You can't see it, they're blue on the other. There are these beacons around the field. Remember those equations I showed a few minutes ago? That's what those equations are for. They're called belief equations, and the robot believes it's somewhere on the field, and those equations, which are affected by the beacons and the goal, are affected by their presence. Sidelines are raised. There's only two robots. They're dogs. They're small. There's a whole host of things. I could tell you in minute detail while every one of those things is true. They're all the result of very careful choices. Now, another thing that technology does is iterate. Think of the iPhone. It's introduced in 2007. It was underpowered, it was clunky. Every year, Apple updates it year after year. In a given year, this year, people aren't that impressed. It doesn't seem like they did much this year. But over a number of years, the results are pretty astonishing. In tech, this is done in cycles. And Robocup, just like the iPhone, has a yearly update cycle. As we'll see later, compared to the world of apps, this is actually really slow. So I looked for some video from the first Robocup. I only found one. This is from 1999.
Is it really there? It certainly is.
This is a robot program by the University of New South Wales in Australia from a team that would eventually earn the name Run Swift. They had a long way to go. All right, I'm going to skip ahead 8 years now to 2007, same year the iPhone was introduced. That year, a team of undergraduates from a small liberal arts school in Maine went to Robocup, which happened to be in Atlanta, and we were notably heavy underdogs. No school smaller than 25,000 students had ever won Robocup. The favorites were a team from Germany, from a consortium of 4 universities. That team featured 6 faculty members and more than 60 graduate students. Our heroes came from a department that had less than 30 students total. At that time, only 4 faculty members, none of whom were trained in robotics, only one of whom helped out the team. The only other Robocup team in history that was made up of undergraduates had never and would never score a goal in competition. So naturally, we dominated the competition and won. So here's what Robocup looked like in 2007. Now think about the video you just saw, and think about that iteration year over year that was happening in Robocup. Yeah. By the way, I want to give a shout out to David Israel, who's in the audience tonight, for designing that logo. So each year, the robots or soccer players metaphor is getting better. They're looking more like soccer players, a little more at least. And it was connecting to the public. The finals in Japan in 2005 took place in front of 5,000 people and would have had more if they had a bigger arena. Most host countries devote hours of primetime programming on television when they have Robocup, the US being a notable exception to that. Our own team has been featured on CNN, the Discovery Channel, the Travel Channel, the Science Channel, and in a whole host of publications. And Robocup was driving research as well, attracting new students to computer science. Those students in that video, 4 of them would not have majored in computer science if there hadn't been a Robocup team. Of those 4 students, 3 of them went on to get PhDs in computer science. Some of them are working on self-driving car projects right now. So in 2009, the iterative process of Robocup jumped up a level, and we introduced humanoid robots. Now, everyone, and I'll put me into this mix, assume that this is the end for places like Bowdoin College. At the time, to get a robot to walk on 2 legs generally took someone getting a PhD. It's a really hard problem. That year, the competition was covered by the Discovery Channel, and here's a snippet of their report, which was mainly about our team, and I'll just apologize to the person doing the report. Well, you'll see.
Northern Bites is about to find out if their newly tweaked goalie is an all-star or not. This semifinal comes down to sudden death penalty kicks. This is exactly how Northern Lights lost the title last year. They can't watch anymore, even when their player scores. But the competition is watching.
Yeah, we're watching every team that is winning games or that is scoring by. We always look, do they score randomly or are they robots operating direct?
It's a nail-biting finish. The so-called undergrad underdogs come through. The celebration is short and sweet. They're getting revved up for the final.
So as a side note, the year before we had lost in the semifinals in the World Championship in a penalty shootout because we literally hadn't programmed a penalty shootout. We had more important things to work on. This year we came ready and we won in a penalty shootout, and honestly, it's the most stressed I've ever been in my entire life. Except maybe tonight. So the metaphor is working, right? We're getting real robots on TV, we're driving research. To get robots to play soccer involves solving a lot of robotics problems. They're all problems that robotics needs to solve anyway, but the methods in order were driven by that competition. And this is another feature of metaphors, that they drive creativity. Metaphors put old things into new contexts and foster new ways of thinking. Now, it might not be obvious, but all of the problems that Tesla and Ford and all the car companies are trying to solve right now, and Google trying to build self-driving autonomous cars, are all problems that Robocup has been working on for 20 years or so. And as I said, a bunch of Bowdoin students are now working on those problems at those companies. I'm going to skip ahead a few more years and give you an example of that. Some things I want you to pay attention to in the next clip: how big the field is, the fact that the robots have uniforms. Bowdoin's in black in this one, some custom-made uniforms. And from a robotics perspective, there's one thing that, for me, just stands out like a sore thumb. I want you to try to imagine what that is and see if it's the same for you. I suspect for most people it won't be. So this is a great example of how that metaphor, that robots are soccer players, is actually driving the development of technology. I mean, who would work on making robots dive into the ground if they weren't playing soccer. But it turns out that having to solve that problem led to a whole bunch of new ideas about how to do perception and some other things. Now, the thing that stands out for me isn't the goalie, although I want to shout out Nikki Morin, who was the student who programmed the goalie. It's the goal itself. It's white. And before this, I would have thought, wow, that's impossible. Right? Now, for you, it's like, well, what's the big deal? Soccer goals are white. I mean, how hard is that? For humans, it's just a trivial detail. As a robotics problem, it's outrageously hard. Imagine a robot falls and gets up, it looks around. How does it know which way it's looking? The field is completely symmetric. There are players on both ends wearing uniforms of different colors. It's a ridiculously hard problem. Okay, so the goal of Robocup is that the Robocup champions will play in a match against the FIFA World Cup champions by the year 2050. Now, in these videos, we've seen roughly 15 years of progress. Think about what you saw in that first video. Here we are 15 years later. So when this video was made, there's still about 35 years of iteration to happen. When I started in Robocup, I laughed at the goal, like, they're not serious about this. By the time I left Robocup, I thought, yeah, I could see that happening. So what are the downsides to some of these metaphors? Over the years, the team and I gave lots of talks and demonstrations trying to explain to the public what was going on. Here we are in the National Mall. It's part of the National Science Experience. Here we are in one of 2 trips to New York City for appearances at the World Science Fair. By the way, the organizers here were legitimately concerned that they would break down the doors to get in, and that once the kids were inside, that they would rush the stage and that we would get hurt. I wasn't so worried about that. I was worried about the robots getting hurt, but that's different. The kids, both here and in New York and wherever we went internationally, loved what we're doing, but they didn't understand it. A lot of people, and there's a little bit of this in the audience tonight, the thing that stands out is, well, the robots fall down and then they get back up. Like, people found that to be very cool, but it is literally the first thing we would give new students to program on the team. It is the very easiest thing to make those robots do. The other problem was BattleBots. People watch the TV show BattleBots, and they think, well, where are the remote controls? Who's controlling the robots? So we had to explain, no, they're autonomous, they're making their own decisions, and we're not, I mean, can't you tell? We're not doing everything that they're doing. But even once we made that clear, by far the most common question from, kids of that size was, why are your robots so stupid? Okay, so the metaphor succeeded in connecting robots to the public, giving the public a better understanding of the kind of capabilities of robots, but not in explaining how they work. And this is typical of digital metaphors. They help with what the technology does, but they often mask how it happens. Now, for your average tech company, this is actually great. This is what they want. They don't want, and oftentimes, they don't need you to understand the details of their product. They only need you to know what it might do for you. They want simple metaphors that are trivially understood. They just want you to believe. I would also note, for many tech companies, it's not in their best interest for the public to know how their products actually work. Consider Facebook, what they're doing with data collection and dissemination and so forth. It's a very important part of their product, but not at all a part of their communication or their metaphors. So returning to what tech companies do want you to understand, the most obvious thing they can do is find a good metaphor, to have you see their apps as being like some real-life counterpart that you already know about. So here's a shopping cart button for an online store. An online store is actually a pretty complicated piece of software, but complex is not what Amazon wants you to think about. They want you to have a simple experience, so they present it as being just like regular shopping. There's shopping carts, and you can check out, and the whole ball of wax. That button where you put something into a shopping cart actually triggers a whole series of things most users wouldn't understand at all, and none of them involve shopping carts. None of them really involve products at all. To paraphrase Neo from The Matrix, there is no shopping cart. So an extreme form of this idea that let's make things like the real world is called skeuomorphism. If you're going to try to convince people that a tech object is the same as the real thing, then you might as well go all the way and make it look as much like the real thing as you possibly can. So here books are arranged on a fake bookcase. It even has fake wood grain you might not be able to see in the audience. We've probably used e-readers that animate page turning. Some of them even curl up the pages and show. They're trying to convince you, in a sense, that it's a lot like reading a normal book. There aren't pages in those electronic books, and there's a very good argument to be made that this is harmful. E-readers are good at things that regular books aren't. Books are good at things that e-readers aren't, right? And trying to pretend that e-readers are books can stunt how their development of their product works. Too little abstraction can be a bad thing in this world. On the other hand, abstraction is very powerful. When analysts describe the stock market as climbing its way higher, they're ascribing agency to something that has no agency. Investors subconsciously expect, since the market has agency, that it'll continue trying to go higher. Conversely, if the market is described as having dropped, then investors don't see any agency, and there's less expectation that the drop will continue. If we don't stop and think about metaphors, they can have these kinds of effects on us without us knowing it. Now, for my money, hands down, the all-time greatest tech metaphor is touching is selecting, the basis of touch user interfaces on smart devices. It was only introduced 15 years ago, that iPhone, but it's difficult to imagine life without it. It's so ingrained into people nowadays that there are lots of stories about children who go up to TVs and try to swipe the TV to change the channel. It's estimated that touching and selecting drives more than $1 trillion of economic activity a year. And it's easy to forget, when the iPhone first came out, it was heavily criticized for not having a hardware keyboard. Touching and selecting doesn't seem like a metaphor at all. We touch to select all of the time. Our fingers, as Steve Jobs put it, are the greatest selecting devices ever created. But nevertheless, that metaphor hides a great deal of technical wizardry, a lot of software. It's also what we call a foundational metaphor. Other tech metaphors start with the assumption that we all understand touching and selecting, that the users know it, and then those apps in turn can build upon it. It's another feature of digital metaphors in general. They form constellations and hierarchies. Think about the desktop metaphor. That's the heart of today's computers. We're told that our computer is an office, and we have a desk there, and it has a trash can, and we can access files. We see things by looking out of windows and so forth. Together, this constellation of metaphors and ideas is designed to make the unknowable knowable. Here's what happens when technology doesn't have a metaphor. So this is a QR code. In principle, it's incredibly useful. In practice, it's like nothing in real life. It doesn't communicate anything to potential users. Just speaking for myself, I'm afraid to use QR codes because I'm afraid what might end up on my phone. They've been long a notable tech failure, and I would argue it's because of the lack of a metaphor. They're making a comeback now. Turns out they're useful in a pandemic, But even now, people are very slow to trust them. This, on the other hand, is very easy to connect to, a heart icon. Of course, the heart itself is a metaphor, so this is what we might call a second-order metaphor. It's a way to express appreciation. It has a long history that way predates mobile technology, and it's just another way that technology builds on things we already know about. Now, in social media, on the internet, the heart icon is used to express appreciation and support. Love. It can't help but feel good to do this. You're letting people know that you like what they're doing. On the other side, it's nice to be liked. It's nice for people to heart things you post. It generates positive emotions, both for the person hitting the button and the person who receives that support. It isn't an accident that when you directly interact with social media apps, almost all of those interactions are designed around positive things, and I'm ignoring the contents of the post here. Those positive emotions are in turn associated with the app itself. If getting hearts on Instagram feels good, then Instagram must make me feel good. Now, I don't have time to get into it, but chasing those likes has a lot of other implications. This is Facebook's like button, thumbs up symbol. It's also happy. Also expresses appreciation. It's nice to support your friends, or at least what Facebook calls your friends. Facebook rolled this out in 2010 after a lot of testing, a lot of research. I mentioned previously that tech is iterative. We can think about any product's trajectory as a kind of spiral, with developers on one side influencing it by their choices, users on the other side influencing it by their feedback, the different ways they use it, their choice whether to use it at all or not. Developers release a product or update, users start using it, providing feedback. Developers take the feedback, they make adjustments, they put out a new version. Goes on and on. In mobile, it happens really fast. New car models come out once a year. Big changes happen about every 5 or 6 years. TikTok put out 60 versions of its app last year. The tech company Stripe claims it put out 3,300 new versions of its API just last year alone. I'll point out that Shakespeare hasn't updated Romeo and Juliet in centuries. Some filmmakers have put out their own updates, though. But this is just another way that the digital world accelerates the process of change and of learning. And developers are learning too. That Facebook like button is a result of a lot of experiments. Different users got different buttons. Facebook looked at which buttons got the most response, the most engagement, which is what they're looking for. Once they determined which was best, then they rolled that out to everyone. And they do this all the time in something they call A/B testing. They're learning how to grab our attention and how to hold it. The Wall Street Journal has been putting out amazing articles about technology lately. Last week they had a series on Facebook, and they put it this way. Facebook sells user attention to advertisers. That's really what Facebook is. That's their model. And their users are willingly teaching them how to get that attention. To you, clicking the like button, showing a friend some appreciation and support. To Facebook, they interpret that act as being, I would like more things like this, please. This is the stuff that makes me happy and keeps me engaged. So as early as 1971, long before the internet, the Nobel Prize winner Herb Simon noted that attention is the most precious resource in an information-rich world. And it's safe to say that in the 50 years since then, it's a lot worse. This has given rise to what's been called the information economy. So the start of the information economy came with television, whose metaphor was a window to the world. And unlike TV, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, the rest of them can let us create content for them. We gladly do it. Mostly we do it for free. And unlike television, the mechanisms for feedback are instantaneous. They're in real time. They can be tailored to all of us individually. Again, these apps are competing for our attention, and we're constantly teaching them how to best succeed at it. Those hearts, those likes, they're amazing teachers. They say, here's what I like, and I want more. It gets worse, though. The Wall Street Journal, another article about TikTok, showed that TikTok is capable of learning what we like without us hitting like buttons at all. All the algorithm needs to do is watch how much time we linger over any given video. If it turns out I tend to watch cat videos or at least pause on them, TikTok then builds the assumption that I like those, and eventually it just starts feeding me more and more of those videos. Now, as a consumer, fantastic, I love cat videos, right? But also, I'm telling it how to distract me. We're teaching our apps how to distract us. There's another aspect of this that's revealed by the example, which is the algorithms, the AIs involved, they make digital metaphors unlike normal metaphors, unlike normal technologies, because they have agency. In many cases, we willingly give them that agency. Here's a notification icon. Once upon a time, we had calendars on our refrigerators or small planners, and their effectiveness depended on, did I look at the refrigerator that morning? If I didn't, I might forget my meeting. Now our calendars are on our phones. We don't want to forget our meetings. So we tell our apps to please interrupt us. Please tell me when I need to do something. Please tell me when there's new information that I might want. Please interrupt me all the time. We happily give agency to our apps because we want them to effectively mediate our lives. And everybody knows phones are fantastic at interrupting us. A little surprised, no phones have rung during this talk. And this is another form of learning acceleration. The combination of those interruptions and the repetition, it happens over and over, those things, and the result, I'm getting something important, those things take advantage of the most basic learning mechanisms. The way we respond to our phones is really quite Pavlovian. Pavlov's dogs learned to salivate when they heard bells because they learned that the bell would come before food. For us, it isn't food, it's generally information. So we call these things phones, but really nowadays it's a misnomer. Texting swamps phone calls on most phones. A lot of the reviews of the new iPhones I've noticed have said basically they should be called cameras now more than phones. That's where Apple and Google and Samsung are putting their efforts. That's what differentiates one from another. When Amazon introduced its phone, they didn't even mention the fact that it could make phone calls. That metaphor was useful 15 years ago, but what is it now? Is it a computer? Well, it can do a lot of things computers can't. Computers can do a lot of things that our phones can't. My family has a washing machine at home with a processor that's probably faster than the ones in the Apollo space missions. It's definitely not a computer, right? So there's more to it than chips and processing information. And it turns out this has huge legal consequences that are currently playing out in Congress and in courts across the world. Just to give you an example, we're allowed to install any software we want on our computers, but we're not allowed to do that on our phones. Apple and Google want to treat our phones like Nintendo and Sony treat their game consoles, another place where manufacturers exert control over apps. But our phones are a lot more general than consoles. So what is it that our phones really are? What is their defining feature? I would argue the defining feature of phones nowadays is that they're always with us. And since they're always with us, They have the ability to mediate more and more of our lives. We catch up with our friends on apps. We find dates through apps. Apps mediate how we get food, how we find recipes, and show us how to cook food. We tell stories through apps. Apple and Google are using AIs to create memories for us. Those memories, in turn, can be edited, they can be polished. We can cut out the bad parts, we can improve the best parts. It turns out, in terms of psychology, this actually impacts our real memories. Interacting with those online memories changes our own memories of those events. To-do apps are managing our purpose. Apps track nearly every aspect of our health. Do we need to know anything anymore if we can find it on Google? There are almost an infinite number of ways that our phones can keep us amused. So increasingly, apps are mediating nearly every aspect of our lives, and soon even our deaths. Microsoft just announced patents to recreate loved ones as chatbots. All of these things are based on digital metaphors, and all of them are changing the meanings of the concepts that they're linked to, but only for the people that actually use them. Fernando described a car ride home from a paintball game with his kids and some of their friends. The car was dead silent, and it spooked him. Did they have a bad time? Were they mad at each other? No, it turned out they were talking like crazy the whole time, but they were doing it through text. Talking means something very different to them than it did for Fernando. It took the telephone about 75 years to hit 100 million users. As a culture, we had a lot of time to come to terms with all of those changes. Those changes happened slowly because they were hampered by physical infrastructure. Things needed to be built. There's a lot of infrastructure already in place for smartphones, and it's optimized purely for speed. It's another example of an accelerator. It took telephones 75 years to reach 100 million users. TikTok had 2 billion users in 4 years. It didn't have to make anything. It didn't need physical stores. No worries about the supply chain for TikTok. Once its product had been created, it could be effectively reproduced infinitely. Also, let's think about that car ride a little more. Now imagine what would have happened if one of the kids in the car didn't have a smartphone. Right? Things might have gotten very awkward in the car. Now, Fernando's kids are lovely and they would have handled it beautifully, but it's easy to imagine how awkward that situation could have been. Not everyone has a smartphone. Sometimes it's due to choice, sometimes economics, sometimes it's geography. I have a brother who doesn't have a smartphone. He doesn't even have an internet connection. When he's involved in family conversations, I think increasingly he feels like the person on the one cliff who doesn't understand what the rest of us are saying. Now you could say, well, everybody's on TikTok and Facebook or has apps. TikTok has 2 billion users. There are 5 billion people who don't have TikTok. There are 5 billion people who don't use Facebook. The differences between those groups are accelerating. Metaphors redescribe reality. We're told to see one thing as being something else. We're told that texting is conversation. And it's reinforced over and over the more we do it. And it's ever evolving. In lots of ways, it's better, right? Our phones take away limitations of time and space. You don't have to be in the same place to talk to someone. I can text my family and say, here's what's going on. They don't have to know in real time, right? In lots of ways, it's better, but we've learned through the pandemic, right? Zoom fatigue, in lots of ways, it's not. Digital connection may be a substitute for physical connection, but it's still a poor one. We were evolved in a face-to-face world. Our attention system still works best that way. Meanwhile, texting has other problems. Think about the time between you send a text and when you get a reply, the number of things that you can read into that. My kids have been trying to teach me about the difference between the word okay, the letters okay, the letter K, and the letter KK. And apparently those differences are substantial, and I'm still kind of fuzzy on them. The fact that they're evolving so quickly, though, and they're becoming so ingrained, it's so important to people, it's making our group structures that much stronger and tighter. Learning relies on having shared signifiers. To communicate effectively, we need to agree on what things mean. It's normal for language to change, but all of those accelerators I've been talking about, they're making the pace of change dramatically faster than at any time in history. Different groups are literally starting to speak different languages. Now, it's not my intention to say that the redefinition of conversation or of relationships or memories or even self is bad. I'll leave that up to you all individually. But I do think it's important to call attention to it and to look at the consequences with a critical eye. And also for all of the things that those metaphors are hiding. It's popular, it's easy to use Facebook as the poster child for this. I certainly do it all the time myself, but they're just the most obvious example because they're the biggest. Smartphones and apps are only growing in importance. We need to understand those consequences. The argument we're making in our book is that this examination process should start with understanding the role of metaphors. As we've seen, metaphors are a powerful way to communicate. They allow us to bundle up information in a very few words, but they also rely on the person who's listening to make the right connections and abstractions. Once they do so, they might see the world in a whole new way. A good metaphor can do this. In our book, Fernando writes about a song that describes Rio de Janeiro as a purgatory of beauty and chaos. Now, as you might imagine, how you interpret that metaphor depends a lot on what you know about Rio and even on what you know about purgatory. You might also guess that Fernando, as a native of Brazil, and me, as a typical American, know very different things about Rio and came maybe to different conclusions about it. Regardless, it's a metaphor that gets you thinking about Rio and how your conception of it fits and doesn't fit the metaphor. And afterwards, you'll have a new understanding of Rio. By contrast, understanding touching and selecting is effortless. In a digital metaphor, we're still learning and altering our meanings, but we're not doing it by thinking about things, we're doing it by action. To effectively interact with these digital metaphors, we have to understand what they want us to do. And that's why they have to be so simple. The implementation of a technology guides our understanding. If I want to think about Rio as a purgatory of beauty and chaos, I have to think, in a nutshell. If I want to figure out what happens when I swipe something on the screen, I just do it and see what happens. Among other things, learning by doing is generally much faster. Meanwhile, that app I'm swiping in is learning about me and getting feedback from me. If I'm not doing a good job, if I'm learning the wrong things, then the developer will take that feedback, they'll make a new version, and hopefully they'll improve the user interface. Regardless, when I'm listening to that song about Rio, it's suggesting connections to me. As individuals, we can come to different conclusions. That's really the beauty of what poets and songwriters do. When I'm interacting with an app, it's a completely different story. The app is trying to move us all into the same place. We want to have the same understanding. Even in this talk, right, you've all seen robot soccer players now. And so now we all have a pretty similar model of what that looks like. That model may well be very different than what you thought it would look like when you came here. And now, because I put it in your head, the next time you think about robots, you can't help it, you'll think a little bit about what you saw tonight in this talk. Now, I would go so far as to argue that we need some sort of field of study devoted to issues like this. It would have to take on technology with a critical eye, even using the very tools of computation to do it. This field would need to look at digital artifacts, the architectures they're embedded in. It would need to look at the abstractions, the metaphors, and the impact of those abstractions. Issues of agency would be critical. Who has it? Who doesn't have it? And of course, we have to look at accountability. When things go wrong, and they often do, who's accountable? Things go right, who's accountable? This not so hypothetical field should probably have a name. I have a proposal. Digital and Computational Studies. Thank you. Okay, so questions can be had. I'm told that if you have a question, you should go to one of the microphones. Otherwise, I'll assume that my talk was so clear and obvious, that my communication was so effective that there aren't any questions to have, but I would welcome them.
Hi, Professor Chown.
Hi.
So as part of this study, this Digital and Computational Studies department, which I've also been fortunate enough to be a part of and seen its growth, and I want to thank you all for that. One question that's been crossing my mind has been, in exploring these metaphors, there almost seems to be this all-encompassing nature of the internet, right? You know, the fact that now our elections are reliant upon the integrity of our, data, the fact that we have entire economic infrastructures developed on it. And it seems like we're losing our ability to actually understand the whole encompassing nature of this through the predicating metaphors that we've known. I mean, it seems like political science is falling behind. It seems like economics is unable to catch up. It seems like these metaphors have kind of taken their own little beast, and now we see the consequence of that. And it's just the questions that's been crossing my mind is, how do you think we can try and overcome these challenges? Because it seems like if we can't, we're always going to be a step behind these people who get to solidify the metaphors in which we're interacting.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it raises a lot of issues. Over the years, I've given a lot of talks about robots and artificial intelligence, and a lot of the questions from the audience kind of come down to, this is scary, things are getting out of control, I personally can't do anything about what's going on. And what I would say is that it starts with knowledge. It starts with taking a step back and thinking about what we're doing. I mentioned thinking about the metaphors that we're involved with here. You're right, the internet is crazy complex. I talked about phones and how complicated it is just to make a phone call. The internet is that times 10,000 probably. And it seems like, I spent a lot of time convincing everyone tonight that the pace of change is ramping up probably faster than we can keep up with. There are antidotes to that. We don't have to be on our phone. Like individually, there's this push and pull. It's those kids in the car. If you're not on the phone, you're left out. That's the thing I think that we have to start grappling with. The groups that are being made because of social media, because of the internet, and how we're, as I said, accelerating and solidifying those groups. We, as a society, need to start looking at ways of thinking better, of thinking of alternatives. We're not doing a great job of it so far. You know, new technology comes, new app comes, fantastic, I'll download it, I'll use it. We don't stop to think about it. I was raised by a proud Luddite, and whenever I came home from college, I would say to my mom, there's this cool new computer or whatever, and her reaction was always the same. Why would I want that? And I think we need to start asking that question more. I really like the philosophy of the Amish in that regard, because they really do ask that question. They're not just anti-technology. I don't have a good answer. It's a really hard problem, but we need to start working on it. Shout out tonight to my students.
Good evening, Professor. You spent some time talking about how social media learns things that we're interested in or things that we like, but what about things that are like fostering anger or aggression, such as like the large divisions that are growing in public forums like Facebook or Reddit?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And you know, I framed things earlier in terms of positive emotions, but social media also takes advantage of negative emotions, things that we don't like. And you know why? It's because those things engage us. It's engaging to get angry. It's engaging to look at the latest travesty of whatever group you're mad at. And that's another aspect of that you know, we're not doing a good job with. And I think finally things are opening up a little bit in this front. I think finally the press, you know, I mentioned the Wall Street Journal. I'm going to mention them again. Their technology team has been amazing in the last year. The stories they write about TikTok, about Facebook, they're giving people some clarity and some insight. And again, that's the start, that's the antidote, is education. Learning more, getting more people to learn about it. That's how we're going to make things better. And pointing out to people, like, getting angry has consequences. You know this. We read about it in class this week. Like, people who get angry all the time on social media, they don't live as long, right? They have high blood pressure. They're going to get heart attacks, this, that, and the other thing. We need to educate people about that. There are consequences to all that anger. Any other?
I'll go one more. You mentioned in your talk tonight that metaphors can have agency. I found that like an intriguing concept. Could you expand on how a metaphor could have agency?
Yeah, one of those conversations where Fernando and I like kind of got carried away and then noticed it was 2 months later was when we were talking about what a tool is and concepts like who's at fault when someone gets killed by a gun. Like, society has been having this debate forever. Do we blame the person who owns the gun? Do we blame the person who made the gun? Well, the gun doesn't have agency per se. It takes someone to pick it up and use it. Algorithms aren't like that. AIs aren't, well, I mean, I guess you could argue that Facebook has to turn it on. But once it's on, it takes on a life of its own, especially for AIs, which are learning. So they're making decisions, they're learning things. And by the way, if you think that Facebook and TikTok understand their AIs, I have another thing coming for you, because they're all using neural networks. And the primary feature of neural networks is that no one understands how they're making their decisions. We understand how they learn, but we don't understand their decisions. And they're making decisions. They're not carefully chosen by Mark Zuckerberg or whatever CEO. Those algorithms are learning on their own. They are entities. They're not sentient. They're not like robots that are sentient. And they won't be for a long time. But still, they are making decisions. They are making things happen in the world. They are reacting to their environment, and they're doing things. Any other questions?
Good evening. I was just wondering, towards a point that you had just made about companies not understanding their own AIs, neural networks, et cetera, with tentatively, at the very least, AI singularity approaching sometime in the coming few centuries, do you think
I'm glad you said centuries there, by the way.
You're welcome. Just like we forgot, like I'm pretty sure very, very few people in this room know how to hand weave a basket because it's just produced in a factory these days. Do you think eventually, through transient property, we'll become the quote-unquote obsolete thing and understand our own creations so little that we just don't know what to do with them anymore and we essentially get left behind?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the fears about AI, right? And honestly, I'm not worried about that singularity a couple of centuries off. I'm worried about the AI that's being deployed today. I'm not worried that people are going to become obsolete. People like to do things. They like to have meaning and purpose, and people will continue to find ways to do that. And if we're smart, we'll help our AIs help us to do that. I am worried about the AIs that we have on the ground right now, which again, are doing things that the people who make them don't necessarily understand because there are lots of complicated links in a neural network and so forth. This focus on evil AI and artificial intelligence, Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking and Bill Gates, they're all talking about it, right? We got to watch out for AI. It's gonna achieve sentience and we're all gonna be obsolete. I've been in that world for a long time. It is not happening for a long, long time. But AI is doing a lot of things in the world right now. And we need to look at those things and we need to think about whether we want AIs doing those things. Rose is somewhere in the audience, I think, or was somewhere in the audience. She's doing an honors project on what's called, or a DCS project on what's called Explainable AI, right? So people are recognizing that I'm not so comfortable with the fact that even the people deploying these things don't really know how they're making their decisions. So for me, it's let's worry about now. The world has to figure out now before we get to the singularity. We've got our own set of problems with global warming and everything else. So let's devote our energies in the short run to that stuff. I love the singularity. I'll say the singularity is the idea that one day AIs will be so good that you'll kind of go to bed and it'll be a normal world and you'll wake up the next day and if you wanted to, you could teleport to Mars because AI has happened and its knowledge essentially goes straight up. It's a cool concept. It's fun to think about. It ain't happening. Any other questions? All right. Well, I'm tired. Thanks for coming.